Hello, and welcome to AERP Indiana's fourth virtual event in our series, Caregiver Weeklies. I'm Diana Van Hooks, a member of the Evansville volunteer team. I'm joined today by two directors of community engagement, Emily Gorman and Addison Pollock. Addison and Emily, how are you doing today?
Hey, Diana, we're great. How are you?
Doing good, trying to stay warm.
Yeah, Emily, how are you? Sorry, I didn't mean to speak for
No,
both of
you're
us.
fine. I'm good. I'm excited for Thanksgiving week.
Absolutely.
Yes. I want to remind our audience that the Caregiver Weeklies features series live interviews that are available on our website. Each week, sorry, forgive me, everybody. I'm a little nervous today, but I'm also excited. I want to remind our audience that the Caregiver Weekly series features live interview style videos with caregiving experts from across the state each week in November, which is also known as National Family Caregiving Month. All month, we will cover a host of topics related to caring for a loved one and ensuring that their needs are met. You can find archived versions of these events on our Facebook page under the video section. Today, we are joined by attorney Cliff Davis, who will be sharing information with us about several critically important legal aspects of being a caregiver. We also hope to provide an overview of elder law and dig into key topics such as asset protection, estate planning, Medicaid benefits, and more. My hope is viewers will learn something important today. I know I will. Lastly, I want to remind our live viewers that you can ask questions. Please use the chat function to provide questions if you have them. And without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Emily and Addison.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Diana.
Diana.
We appreciate it. Emily, do you want me to just go ahead and introduce our guest?
That'd be great. Yeah, go
Perfect.
ahead.
So, Clifton Dennis, also known as Cliff Dennis, was admitted to the Indiana State Bar in October 2009. He received his law degree from IU Robert H. McKinney School of Law in 2009 as well. In addition, Clifton received his undergraduate degree at IU Bloomington with distinction in 2006, receiving his Bachelor of Science in Public Affairs. Hey, Public Affairs. I'm also a Public Affairs grad, so love it. With a concentration in legal studies. Cliff is a member of the Indiana Bar Association, the Indianapolis Bar Association, and the former president of the Indiana chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, as well as former president of the advisory board of SACOA, who we've talked to on this series. So that fits in perfectly. Cliff grew up in Fort Wayne and now has relocated to Indianapolis. So without further ado, Cliff, can bring you online.
Hi
Hey,
there.
how are you?
Not too bad.
Good. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah,
So, Cliff, we have some questions here that we just want to kind of dive into. But before we kind of hit on the elder law information too heavily, can you just tell us a little bit more about what you do and the types of law you practice?
sure. Well, and I would hate to, for it to be about me, but I would try to broaden it to elder law attorneys in general. But typically, most of me and my colleagues, our area of expertise really involves us assisting families with all aspects of kind of end of life care and planning. And so, when we kind of identify ourselves as elder law attorneys, it kind of is it's a big area of practice that gets and lots of different topics that get dwindled down and or like used and summarized in this one word that I think not everybody really ever fully understands. So the real broad topics that most elder law attorneys would be able to assist somebody with would be things like you might think of estate planning, wills, trusts, powers of attorney, that sort of thing, adult guardianships if that planning had not been done ahead of time. It would also be probate work when somebody passes away, and if there's a need to go to court about any of those things, any aspects of that. But the big one that kind of sets elder law attorneys apart from other estate planning attorneys is the issue of care and when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare, how those programs work to help pay for care Typically, I wouldn't say all elder law attorneys are going to know how to deal with the VA administration, but a lot of them will, in terms of helping with that aspect of paying for care. But really, it is assisting with the transition to having home care in the home or moving to assisted living or a skilled nursing facility as well. Um, a lot of elder law attorneys will also assist with special needs planning, so that's also an aspect of our practices typically as well.
Perfect. Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll try and dive into some of the more details of what you just touched on there, some of the topics you touched on. But where I wanted to start was, I don't know if you have like a list or some guidelines for just documentation that people should have readily available if you're a caregiver for somebody that you're taking care of. Is there a list that you should go through and make sure you have access to?
Well, as a caregiver for a loved one, it would be ideal if you had a sort of binder or whatnot of information on the individual that you're assisting. I oftentimes have meetings with families where I get the infamous shoebox of things, or an old briefcase from years and years ago. But whatever the vehicle is that you have these documents in, it is ideal to have those initial set of estate plan documents ready to go before, from the perspective of the person who needs care, or who's aging. It would be ideal for that person to have already done their estate planning, and so that the caregiver could then have those documents available to them to be able to assist. And then from there, it's really just all the documents that loved one is going to need, that caregiver is going to need in order to know everything about your life. So for me, I start with a family with an intake form, which goes through all of the aspects of their life. And I tell the client and the caregiver, I hope you don't think of this as homework. I hope you think of this as a guide towards what you should all have readily available as you are going through this, caregiving journey. So that includes examples of bank statements. That would include copies of driver's license and Medicare insurance cards. That would include the estate plan documents I mentioned before, copies of the life insurance policies that you may or may not have, deeds to property if you own property, those sorts of things. All of those aspects of your life that the person may run into. And so my intake form goes through a lot of that, and most of elder law attorneys as well. I mean, it's talking about its contact information for the rest of the family. It's who's my doctor. You'd be surprised at how many caregivers don't know some of those things about their loved one. So having all that information available is super important.
Okay, got it.
That's great. Cliff, you touched a little bit on the financial piece of the puzzle. What is the best way for folks to prepare some of those, not only the documents, but just prepare in generally for a loved one to have access to the care and treatment that they may need as they age?
Well, not to sound like a broken record, but the estate planning piece is huge, because there's oftentimes a family comes in and they don't have access to the financial aspect of someone's their loved one's life, or they've structured it in such a way for convenience that's not necessarily the best way that protects the person. So ideally what people would have is those estate plan documents ready, the financial power of attorney, for example, and any financial institution that they work with would have a copy of it, because there's no central place. I think this is a common misconception. There's no central place for people to provide these documents and then kind of have everyone aware of what's going on in your life. You have to physically or virtually take these documents to each institution to let them know that, yes, my daughter Sally is my power of attorney who should have access to my accounts. So that's a big part of it. There's alternative ways that families kind of will be told that they could handle this. Like a bank will say you can just add your daughter on as joint on the bank account, but that can get it's obviously very easy and it's convenient, but it comes with a number of risks, because it's not that, I'm presuming that the daughter's going to be a questionable character. It's more of the issue of, you're exposing your accounts to her liability. So if your daughter were to get in a car accident and is sued, then your account now could be pulled into that lawsuit. So it's things like that where doing it the right way up front can save a lot of time and effort and headache and
Great.
drama.
Yeah. So that power of attorney is a very helpful tool.
It is, absolutely.
In terms of just continuing the discussion on how to prepare, do things become different or do they change if the loved one or the person you're caring for isn't 100% coherent all the time? Maybe they're showing signs of dementia or something like that. Do things change if that is the case?
They do. And so that's where, again, like I said, not to be a broken record, the power of attorney would be helpful to have had ahead of time. If that's not the case, which oftentimes it's not, if they're of diminished mental capacity, then you start to go down this road in this gray area of saying that is the person still able to do a power of attorney last minute before they were to lose the mental capacity to be able to do that document? Are there other means for us to manage their affairs, or do we have to get a guardianship in place where you go to court and request to be appointed as that person's guardian, and then the person becomes, a ward where that guardian can speak on their behalf, and pretty much that person loses their ability to make decisions for themselves. And that's ultimately where we want to try to avoid, so that so that the power of attorney is in place ahead of time. I guess I'll just leave it at there. I'll leave it at that. That's really it's trying to avoid that situation altogether.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and Cliff, that's actually a great segue into my next question about, the timing of all of this. When does it make sense for someone to reach out to an elder law attorney to try to sort through these things, set deadlines for themselves, sort of those yeah. Can you just touch on that?
Sure. I think that the best time would be obviously before any of these things happen. So I think a lot of times I will get calls from families where they'll be reaching out to me when they retire, or maybe it's a few years before they retire, in order to make sure they've got these planning tools ready before they were to ever get anywhere near this. But I also get calls from families where they've young families where they've just gotten married and had a child, and they want to get things in place because now they have a new member of the family and they want to do this kind of planning. So, I mean, ideally, the sooner the better before any of these situations arise would be ideal. I don't know that I have necessarily a recommendation for when they do it. It's just that they do it. that even if they do it a year before, it's better to have that in place ahead of time. And then the follow-up question I usually get from families is, how often should I revisit it? And I would hate to sound like a car repairman or whatever when it comes to like getting your oil changed, and say, well, you've got to do it every 3 months or every 6 months or whatever. Because some attorneys will tell you should do it every 3 years or so. The main reason to revisit the documents is if something has dramatically changed in your life, or anything's dramatically changed in your assets, or if maybe there's a change in the law, which you may not know of unless you go meet with an attorney. But it's really just dependent on whether there's changes in your life. I think the main thing that lawyers will say is that, you can't really do planning for longer than maybe 3 to 5 years out when it comes to doing these documents. So that's something else to keep in mind too, is that it's not that there isn't a regular time interval where you should probably revisit them. It's just that it's hard to say for each individual person what that interval is, but you also can't plan for much farther than that.
Okay, great. So I'm kind of hearing the earlier the better, and you can kind of sense that, as a caregiver, I'm sure. Awesome.
Yeah.
This next question that I have might be tough for you to answer because I'm sure there are a ton of variables, but I wondered if you could just give our audience a ballpark for if they're thinking they need to reach out to an attorney, what that cost might look like?
Sure.
Just a range so they can maybe be prepared.
Yeah. So, like most things, when you talk to an attorney, the answer is it depends, and so it depends on the complexities of your life. It depends on the project that is being worked on. The good thing about elder law attorneys, at least the ones that I have worked with over my career, is that most of us work on a flat fee basis, and so it is very easy to give you a range. It's going to depend on what the project is. So that's kind of how most of us refer to the cases is almost like projects, because that's really what we're kind of working on rather than other attorneys and going to court. A lot of our projects are more like in the office, transactional. And so doing this basic set of estate plan documents, I would say doing a will, a financial power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, living will or advance directive, that's sort of the base for your estate plan, would be anywhere between $500 and $750 flat fee. Some might be a little bit more expensive than that, depending on where in the state you're talking to this attorney. If you're talking about trust planning, which is not as necessary these days as it used to be, but there's still definitely valid reasons to be setting up trusts. Typically, when I'm talking to families about trusts, it's because there's a special needs individual in the family or something like that. So those, you could tack on another $1,000 to $1,200 to the fee for trust planning. When you're talking about Medicaid planning, that's when it gets a bit more expensive. When you're talking about asset protection planning and applying for Medicaid to help pay for care, when you're talking about that, you're usually more in the $4,000 to $8,000 range, depending on whether it's a spousal situation and the extent to which the planning is necessary versus a single individual, because it's a whole different set of rules with the Medicaid office. I hope that kind of helps in terms of the cost and the range of fees.
No, it definitely does. And I don't think I realized that there was a flat fee version of things. I always thought it was hourly. So I think that's really good to know.
Yeah, there are attorneys that still do hourly around the state, but they're typically more old school attorneys. We've kind of shifted the way most of us practice to do flat fees, just because it makes more sense. It's easier for people to understand. And also, when you're talking about Medicaid planning, you're always shooting for the first of a month to get qualified. So those fees end up being paid prior to the first of the month that you're shooting for eligibility.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's another great segue into the next question. Cliff, can you talk a little bit about Medicare and Medicaid and how it intersects with this elder law estate planning piece of the puzzle? And then when should caregivers start Medicaid planning if necessary?
So the difference between the two, I hope I'm not sort of boring some of the audience in terms of they may know some of these things already, but for those that don't, Medicare is the program that you automatically qualify for when you turn 65. That's going to come with a lot of the kind of traditional benefits that most people are aware of, Part A and B, where you've got hospital coverage and doctor visits and things like that. You can voluntarily elect for the Part B, where they deduct the money from your Social Security check. And typically people will have a supplemental policy to help for all the co-pays that exist with Medicare. So it's just for the sake of simplicity, it's the hospital visits, doctor visits, prescription drug coverage, if you pick up Part D, that sort of thing. Whereas Medicaid is eligibility based on need and based on income and assets. And so for those individuals that qualify that are over 65, typically you can become eligible for it over 65 and not be in the nursing home setting and needing that kind of care. But in that program, or because I think there's over 20 different categories of Medicaid, it will act like a free Medicare supplement when you qualify for those categories of Medicaid. It's QMB, SLMB, and QI are the alphabet soup of programs that people typically are going for when they're trying to get Medicaid prior to any kind of caregiving need. But otherwise, Medicaid is often used by elder law attorneys for the home care benefit, the assisted living benefit, or the skilled nursing benefit, and those have a whole different set of rules associated with them, and it's needs based, and you have to qualify financially, and it'll help pay for the cost of care in those three settings. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely does. It gives folks a general idea, so really appreciate that.
Sure.
And just going back, something you touched on at the beginning when we first started talking, you talked about the VA, and we had a question from one of our volunteers about how the VA can assist with things like this. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so the VA benefit that's commonly referred to by elder law attorneys when it comes to paying for home care, assisted living, or skilled nursing care is the VA aid and attendance benefit. And so, don't want to speak for my elder law colleagues, but I maybe I am to some extent. That most of us really just focus on that one area of VA benefits and not really dive into some of the other service-connected disabilities. And so the VA aid and attendance benefit is a cash benefit that can help pay for home care and assisted living is typically the most common use for it because skilled nursing is so expensive that most people would shift their focus to Medicaid to pay for that. But it's VA aid and attendance, and it's a needs-based program as well. So you have to qualify financially for that. But it's available to any veteran who served at least one day of active duty during a period of war, and their surviving spouse can also qualify. And so that's a good benefit or good program for people to look into.
Definitely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And then I'm just going to call out to our producer, Dan. If there's no audience questions, I just had one last one. So just let me know if you have any in the chat. Cliff, where can folks find out more about elder law assistance in their community? So locally, like what's the first step that they might take to find more information?
Well, so I'd hate to sound self-serving as the former president of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. However, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys would be a good source. NAELA, NAELA.org. It's the professional group of elder law attorneys. You have the Indiana Bar and the Indianapolis Bar, and they have sections of those organizations for elder law attorneys to get together. But NAELA is the kind of professional group that allows us to be a little bit more flexible in how we choose to operate and maybe lobby the government for changes on behalf of our clients. There's a national group and then there's a state chapter. And NAELA.org has a really good resource on the website where you can find a lawyer with clicking on a button and entering a zip code. I've used it myself with my own family to find a lawyer in Florida for my own stepmother. It's really good resource where you can find people that truly do focus on that area, on the elder law area of practice, rather than folks that might just slap it on the wall and maybe not know exactly what they're talking about.
That is super helpful. Thank you. I'm sure a lot of folks out there will tap into that and see what's available.
Yeah,
locally.
they also have a lot of resources on the website as well, pamphlets and PDFs that you can download and look at on all of the topics that we've talked about today.
Perfect. Emily, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or are we good to close out?
I don't. Yeah, you can go ahead and close out.
All right. Cliff, just wanted to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us. This has been really helpful. It's one of the more technical topics when it comes to caregiving, so we appreciate your expertise. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too.
All right. Thank you. Okay. That was awesome. That was really cool.
That was amazing. I learned a ton.
Hey, Diana. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I was listening so intently to everything that he was saying. It was just fabulous.
Yes, it was. Yeah, hanging on to every word, right? that website is super helpful. So hopefully folks will take advantage of that.
I know I will. Well, thank you, Emily and Addison, for hosting our expert guest today. I'm confident that many viewers like myself will be able to walk away feeling like we learned something new and useful today. It absolutely was. And I want to give an extra special thanks to our attorney, Cliff Davis, for taking the time out of his schedule to be with us. And if you enjoyed today's program, please give it a share and get this information out to your family and friends and in your various networks. Additionally, we want you to join us here on Tuesday, November 29th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time to learn about the work that AERP has been doing in the state and the federal level when it comes to caregiving policy. You can learn about that event and others at aarp.org/in. Again, aarp.org/in. And we want to thank you again for being with us today. Take care and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Diana.
Thanks, Diana. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.